Awkward.
So just start whenever. Hi,
Yeah, just
everyone.
yeah.
Hi.
Okay, so I'm excited for today because we're just having a casual conversation, really, about singleness, but really what I think is galvanizing or what has caused this conversation to emerge is the article that I wrote, 30 Single Feeling Pluripotent, which I'm a little bit older than 30, so I think that I don't know why the title is exactly that. I it was supposed to say I'm in my 30s. So but I don't think that sort of changes it at all because it does start off with a realization I had when I was 30. Which I think being 30 as a woman, it can feel like your life is over, especially if you haven't met certain milestones, which is sort of what the article addresses. And I felt that this article, I don't know that I felt that it was urgent. I felt that it was just deeply honest. And I think I wrote it while on a walk because a lot of the things I write, I actually dictate. So, like, I was on a walk and something happened, and I was just like, you know what? I feel really pluripotent, which maybe it was because I was back home with my family, and that's where I graduated with my degree in biology. So I was like really close to my university, thinking about my biology days. Maybe that's what initiated the thought of pluripotency. I don't know. It was just a series of ideas that emerged that led me one day while walking in the cold of Alabama to be like, the thing I feared the most about my singleness is the thing I find the most powerful now, which is that I'm in
Mm.
some ways undefined, where it previously felt like I was unfinished. And I took my phone out, and on my morning walk in the winter, I just spoke it out. And then I obviously went back and like edited it and added and changed and took things out. But that's why this article is written, because I think that's exactly the place that I came to after just many other conversations of feeling like my singleness was a burden or an indictment to my character. I realized that I have the power to rewrite that narrative, not just in my own life, but quite literally because I'm a writer. And so that's what started that. And then we talked about it in one of our meetings, and we're here today to get like just really beautiful perspectives from everyone. So again, my name is Ezrica. I'm in my 30s, and I'm like chronically single. Like I'm so single. I'm like single. So that's my status.
I'm really curious to know what single
I've
means.
never dated anyone.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
That is,
I think we call
yes.
that gold star single, honestly.
Yeah, like
Gold
I have
star,
my
yeah.
PhD in singleness. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank
That's really
you.
impressive.
That is
It's funny that
actually
you say
impressive.
impressive because that again felt like terrifying for so long. It's like maybe I'm too much, maybe I'm not enough, maybe I'm not pretty enough, maybe I'm X, Y, and Z. But now I'm
Mhm.
like, yeah, whatever. Like so yeah, so that's I'm the PhD in singleness.
I think maybe that's the beauty of turning 30. I turned 31 last year and I found myself just like shedding all of these things that I carried, right? Like these like expectations that I don't know, I put on myself or someone put on me in my teens and 20s. And all of a sudden you turn 30 and it's kind of like, I don't think that actually matters that much.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
so I'm 31 and I am married. I have two children under the age of 3. And I married very young. I met my husband when I was 19 and I married him at 21. Um, and he was my basically first serious boyfriend. I did it a little bit in high school, but he was my first kind of serious relationship. And then we just kind of got married. So that's my status.
Well, my name's Ella, and I feel very far from 30. I'm
Mm.
20. I'm a junior in college right now, where everybody is getting married. I personally am not. I'm single. I've dated a little bit in high school and whatnot, but this all feels very big to me, and I'm in this very unfinished zone where there's lots of expectations that I'm putting on myself, and my age is just part of that, I think. So I'm excited to hear what you all have to say about that.
And I'm Trudy. I'm of a very different generation from you three because I am 60. I got married at 30, and in some ways, I guess I hit all the milestones, although a bit late because I got married, stayed married to the same person, had and raised two kids. So in a lot of ways, my life kind of fit the pattern, but I also have always felt a lot of pushback against that pattern, that idea that there's one right way to do life. And maybe because I was single until I was 30, I had a lot of time to think about the way single women get spoken to and about. And I think the most striking thing for me when we had the sort of earlier conversation that led to this is, as a woman, who's almost a senior citizen, it's absolutely devastating to me that women in their 20s and 30s now are still having those same expectations put on them. It feels like, so many decades of feminism, have we made any progress at all?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's a good starting point to the conversation is really the ways the church shapes our understanding of relationships. But Trudy, you said something where I'm writing a children's book right now. Actually, I just finished it, so sent it to the illustrator. And I think the what is it? The page, the what's that page where you like dedicate the dedication page. Wow.
Dedication.
Dedication, yeah.
Like I think a part of the message for that is going to be that there are multiple ways to exist. Like you don't just have to do it one way. But I think the church has been very myopic in its focus. And also, I mean, a large part of Christianity is rooted in misogyny, which when you start to say words like that, people are like, ah ha ha, but like it really is rooted in a system that disproportionately benefited men. And a part of that was the framing of marriage and even purity culture, which this is a podcast Spectrum recorded a couple years ago. But yeah, so for me, in my adulthood, if I'm being honest, there's a church I left within the last few years because I felt like every other sermon was about the need to get married. And it wasn't gracious and it wasn't healthy. It just felt deeply caustic and I've watched so many people in my specific community get married and I'm like, well, I don't know. Like maybe you didn't have to right now, And so I think the church itself frames marriage in a very limiting way. And again, it's the pushback is necessary because we're expanding the vocabulary on how we get to live our lives, even as believers. So I don't know. What do you guys think? How has the church sort of framed marriage for you? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Do you feel like, yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I shared a story on my social media. This was several years ago. I want to say this was maybe 5 years ago. And it was kind of a personal anecdote about some of the kind of purity culture heavy messaging that I experienced. I went to boarding school for a year. My parents are not they do not practice religion in a conservative way, but I had family who did, and they invited me to like youth camps that they were in, and so I went, and so I kind of dabbled, I think, in like conservative Adventism. And I sat in a message once where I was told that Bathsheba was raped because she was nude in public. Like, why would she be nude where she could be seen? Right. So it was
Wow.
kind of like, that's why we protect ourselves. Cause yeah, I mean, he sinned, but she was kind of out looking for it by
It was
not
her
protecting
fault.
her body. Yeah, it was her fault. Right. As soon as I repeated that to my mom was like, that is to spare the explicit rating here. She used and she said no, that's absolutely inappropriate messaging. That's not true, but it is messaging that's repeated. So I was sharing some of these anecdotes, and I had several women, not just one, I had several women DM me on Instagram and say, you know what, I married my husband because I had sex with him. Am I allowed to say the word
Mhm.
sex? Like, I married my husband
Yes.
because I don't know, like what's appropriate on podcasting. Like, I married my husband because I had sex with him before I was married, and I was told that once you have sex, you need to get married. And none of these women are divorced that I can remember, but they did mention it made for a very difficult start to our marriage because it wasn't
Yeah.
a marriage that was entered with full like mental consent, right? It was entered because of like the church pressure. Maybe the church didn't know that I had sex, but that pressure had been put on me through the messaging that I
Yeah.
had
Yeah.
received growing up. It's a terrible reason to get married. Um,
Yeah.
I read a study recently that said, married people tend to be the happiest and the unhappiest groups in society. And that makes a lot of sense because good marriage is great. Bad marriage is the worst possible outcome. And I think that when we push this marriage rhetoric on people, you have to get married, you have to get married by a certain age. If you don't get married, you're going to be left behind. Women approaching their 30s are going to feel a desperation for marriage because if I don't get married, what is to be of my life? And enter into less than ideal marriages, which is the
Mhm.
worst possible outcome,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So,
I
Yeah.
think
This
also
idea
not
that,
just
go ahead.
not just like when you're in the stage of marriage, but I'm in a community of dating right now, and dating is very explicitly like for marriage here. So I feel like people enter relationships with the expectation of this being your person, and then they're not allowing themselves to get to know whoever they're with, and they have these expectations that need to be met to meet these milestones. And I think like we learn in our classes, like we're told how to date, how to take people out, how to be respectful towards women or whatever, but we're not told how to break up. And a lot of people aren't
Mm.
supposed to be together. And then they end up in these terrible relationships. And then something really traumatic happens, and there's this explosive breakup, and people drop out of college, or people will find some other situationship to like fill this hole that this person's left because of all of these expectations and unmet desires. And I think everybody longs for community in a real legit way, but we're not able to find it. We don't have the vocabulary for it right now at the stage of 20.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, this idea of people getting married either because they had sex or because they want to have sex, and then to legitimize it, get married. I think is just. I mean, I know there are people who've gotten married under that kind of purity culture pressure, very young, and have had happy, successful marriages. But it creates so many bad marriages. One of the pieces I wrote for Spectrum a while back, last year, I think, was a review of two memoirs about divorce, Jen Hatmaker's Awake, and I Thought It'd Be Better Than This by Jessica Turner. And my conclusion on both of these was like, these were marriages that shouldn't have happened. These were
Mm-hmm.
marriages by young Christian people who were wanted to legitimize sex, or in one case, because one partner was gay and was given no path to that being an okay relationship. So, let's get married to the opposite sex and see if you can fix that. Yeah, just yeah, it's purity culture has a lot to answer for, and our religious definitions of what is and isn't acceptable, I think, lead a lot of people into really unwise and unhappy marriages.
Yeah, yeah. I think there's several points that come to my mind. First, I realized when I was thinking about like this podcast last week, I was just like going through my mind to explore what thoughts I wanted to share. But somewhere in the process of doing that, I realized that the concept of not having sex before marriage has I've never heard it framed as through the lens of rape or sexual assault, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like it, which is literally sex outside of marriage. It's always been like, oh, you shouldn't engage in intimacy with another person until you're married. And the reason I find that significant is because it just reiterates this idea that or for me, it challenges me to think like I cannot fathom a God being more upset that two consenting adults have sex than a woman being raped. But rape is never the context that it's taken from. And so then it challenges me like, what exactly is this narrative of premarital sex? And that this is something that I think I personally have my own standards around that. It's something that I'm not even vaguely interested in doing, but that's also because I think I like myself too much to just do something so intimate with a random dude. So I have my standards that I can argue without ever opening the Bible. It's like not that the Bible isn't like a good way to understand it, but like I've internalized my own reasoning for living, if that makes sense. Like I have
Mm-hmm.
vocabulary around my own choices, and it's not, oh, it's a sin. I think there are far greater and more expansive ways to explore that for me specifically. But I also think again, like it's just crazy to me that premarital sex, I've never heard it spoken about the disproportionate number of men that rape women or women that are abused by men. That's if you talk about it through that lens, that I'm curious. I want to hear about that versus the shame that's that so many people carry that lead them to make lifelong decisions, which I think marriage isn't even the most irreversible decision. Children are. And
Mhm.
and so that's one of the thoughts that I had. And then it just leads me to question who in one of my classes, I was reading a book on womanism, which I think is just such a beautiful perspective about Christianity. But in the book, one of the phrases or one of the ideas it shared is like who's always had control over the narrative and who benefits from that narrative being told. And I think that's something that is beneficial to when we interrogate the whole culture of marriage. Who had the power to tell the narrative? Who benefited from the narrative being told? And it wasn't us, it wasn't women, for many, many years. And so that's another thought that emerges in my mind. And then the last thing, Ella, you mentioned like we don't have the vocabulary for choosing a partner. One of my best friends and I, we walk every week. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. We're just walking for hours and yapping. And we've known each other since college. I was a bridesmaid in her wedding. I've watched her go through med school. She's about to become an attending. And so I've seen her navigate life, and now she's married. And her current husband is a lot like he's a gentle guy, just really
Mhm.
sweet. And they are best friends. It's so adorable. But I also knew some of the people she dated in the past. So one day we were having this conversation where she's like, the if I married the person I thought I wanted in college, it would have been directly like contradictory to the person I actually wanted to be. And so we started talking about that, where I realized that too, the language of love for me specifically, um, is based on my home where I grew up as an impoverished immigrant, and a lot of life wasn't spent learning how to love. We were trying to survive. So Ezrica didn't have the vocabulary to understand what it meant to be cared for in certain ways until like late 20s, and I'm still developing that now. So if the emotionally inarticulate Ezrica chose a partner, it would have been based on what like the culture around me told me a good partner would be, not what I understood a good partner to be for myself. And so I think one of the beautiful things of not being married yet is that I've very, very intentionally be able to curate a deep and personal understanding of what would enable me to thrive. And I think if I ever end up getting married, because that's not a guarantee either, I do think I will be more participatory in the choice of a partner
Mm.
versus feeling this sense of urgency. I don't think urgency should be a metric for most anything we do in life. I think certainty or like conviction, but I'm not urgent. I'm not like there's no urgency for me to be married, and so I won't make a choice based off of that heightened position. So those are just some of the thoughts that emerged as you guys were speaking.
I love your intentionality, Ezrica.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
taken time. It's taken time.
And it
And
does plug into something we talked about in the earlier conversation about, if you do get married, getting married early versus getting married late. And I'm a big believer in there's no one right way to live your life. For me, 30 was the perfect age to get married, partly because by that time I had met someone I wanted to marry. But when I think about myself, even though I had parents with a very happy marriage who also married at around 30. And so I had a good example in front of me about what, making good choices in a partner and that. I think just in myself, I was not remotely mature enough in my late teens or early 20s to have the relationship and be the kind of person who could be in that relationship with what would be, I think about the people I either dated or had devastating crushes on in my 20s. Yeah, that those would have been some bad relationships had they lasted. And I was, it did eventually find a good. But I remember being told just before I turned 26, I moved back home to the place where I grew up to do grad school, and ran into someone there in the church who was chatting and asked me how old I was. And I said I was, about to turn 26. She said, "Oh, 26. I always feel like if you haven't met the person you're going to marry by the time you're 26, you might as well give up because you're not going to." I'm like, okay. She's divorced now. So not like I'm keeping track or anything, but few people are that explicit about the messaging, but that messaging is definitely there as a woman, and particularly a woman in the church. in your 20s, and as your 20s go on, you're the clock is ticking. You better meet that person, which I, absolutely reject that what you said, Ezrica, that doing anything out of a sense of urgency.
Mhm.
Yeah, I
Mhm.
actually love what you said, Trudy. You said it was a perfect time to marry because you'd met someone that you wanted to marry. And when we were having this conversation earlier, I was kind of trying to advocate for marrying younger, and then as I was speaking, I realized this argument isn't taking me very far. Probably because it's not very good. And maybe the perfect time to marry isn't an age, but it's when you marry when you meet the person you should marry. And when we try to put an age on that, we're rushing ourselves to try to qualify every relationship we have in terms of marriage instead of just honoring the journey that we're on with those people. I was rereading Ezrica's article this morning, and that was like one of the things that really jumped out at me in a section of the article kind of towards the middle was that it's really about honoring the journey that you're on and not wishing that it was a different journey. And
Yeah.
I think that in honoring the journey that we're in, we get to really live out the experience and the life that we're living fully, whether that leads us into a long-term relationship or not. It doesn't qualify our life as better or worse because of a certain outcome, but instead honors the life that we're living as it's being lived right now.
Hmm.
When my husband and I have talked about this a lot. I was 21 when we got married. He was 24, 25. I don't know how old my husband is. Um, he's 3 or 4 years older than me, depending on the time of year, but it feels like luck. Sometimes when you get married that young and the marriage works out, it literally feels like, oh, you got lucky. You got lucky that it worked out. You got lucky that you actually met someone that was interested in growing to be a good partner. Because I was
Mm.
not a great partner when we got married. I was very narrow-minded, right? He was also in his own ways not a good partner. And we had to go through some pretty difficult times in the first 4 years of our marriage and then commit to counseling for the next 4 years of our marriage, individual counseling and a little bit of joint counseling. But it was really it was really ourselves that we were working on to actually form what now I would say like, oh, now you can say, with caveats, we have a healthy marriage. We are each other's best friends, but it took us work to get there. And it feels lucky that you would find someone at 21 that is willing to put in that work and is committed enough to themselves to put in that work for themselves, not
Mm.
for you. And so I do think that the age you can debate here or there, are you mature enough? And then if you wait too long, are you too picky or whatever? Because that's the argument, right? If you wait too long, then you're too picky and you don't make room for people's mistakes and you don't accommodate for people's, whatever, individuality, so on and so forth. I think you can debate that all day, every day. But I think what it really comes down to is, did you meet the right person? And did you get lucky enough to meet someone that's actually committed enough to themselves to want to be the best version of themselves that they can be? So I don't know. I'm really interested to hear from Ella. I feel like I'm removed from the like sex talks that I was getting in my late teens and
Mm.
in college. And so I'm interested, like, what is that culture like now? Like what are they teaching now about premarital sex and purity and all of that?
So I come in from like a little bit of a different lens than most people from Southern because this is my first exposure to Adventist education.
Mm,
My parents are both physicians, so like I grew up with the sex talk in a very like anatomy way. Like every year for my birthday, I would get a diagram of my body and then learn how it's developing type of thing. So I knew what sex was. I talked about it with my friends in a very like this is science. And when I got to Southern, it was entirely moral. It was entirely not talked about unless it was in a structured classroom or purity week, which we do have once a year. And I actually have a friend who, during her birthday party, found out that a man has balls. Like, we're in college and this is a
What a
legit,
fun discovery at that
yeah,
point.
that was a legit discovery that happened on her 21st birthday. So I would say, and she grew up in boarding school, and I think a lot of these people are just like missing the anatomy of sex because it's such a taboo and moralized discussion, and there's so much shame around it. So I do have a lot of friends who like are in relationships and are in serious relationships and are engaging in these things, but it's not talked about. And if it is, either a joke or it's a lesson. Like we make a lot of moral lessons here of what we shouldn't be doing or how we could be doing better. Um, but I I think I'm looking at this from a very abstract view because I'm not as immersed in the community as I could be.
Mm. That's really interesting to me. My husband and I are having this conversation right now because we have two boys, right? And they're gonna be dating in like whatever, however many years. And they're gonna be making choices about what they're gonna do with their body. And so we talk a lot about how do we talk about these things with them. My husband wasn't a virgin when we got married. He's not shy. Like, I mean, he's not like advertising it, but that's not private information. I can share that. Um, I was, and I don't regret it. For me, that was the right choice, much like Ezrica. I'm a very private person with my body, and it would have taken a very high level of commitment for me to feel sexually free with someone. We did reach that commitment before we were married. Like there were other sexual acts that we engaged in. And I say this because I feel like it needs to be normalized because actually none of my friends in college, none of them entered marriage fully pure, however you want to frame that, right?
Hmm.
We all engaged in varying levels of sexual activity depending on our personal comfort level, and yet it all was very guilt filled. And the kind of after effects of that, the effects of that are that I have several friends and family who struggled with I forget the term, but basically painful sex in marriage.
Yeah.
And for years, even for years, they could not have an enjoyable sex experience. And they were diagnosed with, and again, I'm forgetting the term, but it's basically psychological. It is
Mm.
not physical. It is
Mm.
psychological. And Sheila Way Gregor does a lot of research on this, and she has basically found that people immersed in purity culture have have a higher likelihood of experiencing painful sex when they get married. And I think that that just kind of speaks to the rigidity with which we're teaching relationships, including the sexuality aspect of that. I think this is really relevant to the singleness conversation because you have women like Ezrica who you've verbalized that you are choosing to kind of engage in a more traditional sex ethic because that fits your personal ideology. But we have other single people who are single into their 30s, 40s, maybe their whole life. What is the expectation there? If they are sexual beings and they want to have sex at some point, but they have not found someone to be married to, someone that qualifies as a good partner, what is the expectation for them? Are they to get married just to have sex? Are they
Yeah.
to feel guilty for living out their sexual desires outside of marriage? Like, I think those are real ethical questions that we have to wrestle with,
Yeah. Yeah.
especially when we're in a church that's forcing marriage down people's throats and at the same time forcing sexual purity down people's throats.
Yeah, and I actually think the conversation around sex is it's so limited because again, on one of my walks, but a few years ago or something, maybe it was last year, I realized that uh again, the shame that's centered around sex is so destructive that it drives people either deeper into it or further away from it, but not in a healthy way. And I realize, for me, I just wish that people would see that sex is also just a cry for intimacy, which why should someone feel bad that they are craving intimacy? That's who we were
Hmm.
designed to be. Again, as I mentioned, my personal values still technically align with the traditional purity cult. I don't want to say purity culture, but like the way that I'm choosing to live my life, it does technically align with a lot of what Adventism and like Christianity promotes. But that's my personal choice that I'm so in love with. Like I don't feel limited. I feel limitless. But then I do look at like looking around and I just in the same way that we crave social intimacy or spiritual intimacy, as in meeting someone that aligns with you on those aspects. I wish people could understand sex isn't just like breaking the law of God. It is just your body crying out to be held. And I think that's just a more gracious way to look at it, to navigate it. And then again, I go back to like, who told this story? Who told this story about purity and who benefits from this story being told? I want to be clear, I'm not pro or against any specific thing. I'm more so like, the point of our life is not that there is one arbitrary rule that we follow without understanding. It is the gift of being able to engage in intentionality and intimacy with yourself and choose carefully how you want to live your life. That is something you
Mm.
have to work out with yourself, with your partner, and with God. That's not something I can look at you and say, ah, sinner, like I think that's probably the underscoring theme of the article, as you mentioned, Natalie, that they're like, for you, you got married young and you and your husband had to navigate things within your years. For me, I'm like, there's no way I'm marrying an immature man. I'm quite literally too grown for that. For someone else, they get married and they did everything right and it turns out wrong. You don't avoid grief. That's, I think, what I want to say is that for so long, our womanhood has been defined by one path. You get married, you have kids, and that's the only way you get to live. But I'm pushing back on that. Also, another thing, when we did the purity talk years ago, because I haven't dated since then, I still was like, yeah, I'm choosing to remain, like I'm choosing to wait because because in my mind, that's how value translates for me specifically, where I'm like, you're just not worth I'm not being intimate with you. You're not worth it unless like we really commit. But you know in like the book of Paul where he's like circumcised the eighth day of the tribe of Israel, like he starts to list all of his qualifications that make him like the A1. Like he's like, I'm the Jew of Jew. Like I'm it. I'm by every metric of this specific culture, I fit it all. And he still had a thorn in his flesh. I was thinking about it today, again, just the way that I've chosen to live my life. In part, like some of it happened to me, and then by the time my frontal lobe developed enough to make choices, I continued down a certain path. I really have fulfilled all of the standards of Adventist purity. And that's not a flex. It's not even something I don't care about it, but I only say it to say that I think there's this belief that if you do it the right way, you'll get that gift. Right? If you
Mm.
wait till you get married to have sex, you'll have a loving relationship. If
And
you don't,
amazing sex.
yeah, if you don't kiss, if you only date one person, me as Rika have never dated. I am not engaging in sex. I'm not doing any of those things. The things that the church elders and pious folk will be like, look at this upstanding woman. I'm in my 30s and single. Like, I think that's another reason I want to dispel this is there is no reward for honoring God in the way that we've been taught. Like being a good Christian woman gets you a loving husband. Not necessarily. There are people out there who've lived way freer in many regards, or not even freer, but they've made choices that aligned with their lifestyle, and they're married with kids, living on the beach somewhere. Like I just want people to know as someone, and some men will be like, "Oh, you shouldn't have focused on your career." Bro, I was a student missionary for 9 years. I'm telling you, I am on paper like the best Adventist possible, minus my piercings at this point, and I'm still single. So like I think that's something that's important for me is like being married is not a reward. Being single is not a curse. There is only the life I have to live, and I wish more of us had permission to embrace that. You get married at 21 and you have to navigate with your husband, that's your life to live. You're 20, everyone is around you and they're getting like a relationship and that feels disturbing or distressing. That's the life you have to live and navigate. You get married at 30 and you're still married to the love of your life. I just wish that I want women to not be seen as one in like entity. Like we all have different stories, and it's not because we've been good or bad. It's not because we haven't honored God. It's just that this is the life we have to live. And we have the autonomy to find vocabulary, to find
Mm.
language, to make our specific life meaningful and beautiful. That's where I'm coming from. Because if I mourned if I spent every day waiting to be married, what if I get married at 50? Which, come on now, that would be fabulous. Can you imagine me
That'd be
with gray
great.
hair?
Great.
Right? Like, does that
So
mean
much
the
fun.
entirety of my life was meaningless? No,
Mm.
I absolutely refuse to believe that. That's stupid to me. So yeah, that's I'm getting
Yeah.
really passionate and riled up because I think this
But
is like my target message is like, no,
Yeah.
we're not a
well,
monolith. Like, yeah.
yeah, it's so important. And there's this messaging that, if you are young and single in the church, that, you be faithful and God has that perfect person that
Hmm.
he's going to give you as a reward for your faithfulness and your purity and whatever, which is just such total. I don't know. We've already
Yeah,
put
it's
the E rating on this
ridiculous.
by saying the word sex and balls. So
Yeah.
I'm not going to say what that message is, but I don't find it very convincing. I will say, however, one of the most positive messages I received about singleness did come from within the church and from within an Adventist institution when I was, I think, almost exactly your age, Ella, when I was a student at Andrews. Now, Andrews at the time, this was the 80s, had the reputation for being the worst Adventist college to go to get married. If you wanted to get married, you went to Southern. But yeah, I don't know if it still has that reputation, but Andrews was
Yep.
supposed to be, you were serious about getting your degree. But of course, there was still this huge pressure to get married. And our dean of women at the time, in a worship talk, she seemed very old and wise to me. She was 30 and single. Told this story about a friend of hers who had been told that you could put an avocado pit in water and watch it sprout. And so they did the thing with like putting the toothpicks in and balancing in a glass of water. And then this guy pulled up a chair to the table and stared at the avocado pit in the glass. And someone else said, just one piece of advice, do something while you wait. And because he always had no idea how long it took an avocado to sprout. And she said, that's my advice to all of you young women. Don't be here thinking that your purpose in being here is to find your perfect match and the person God has for you. Do something while you wait. Live your own life, pursue your career, pursue the person you're going to become. You're not sitting around waiting for something to sprout and staring at it until it does. And that little avocado story definitely sustained me throughout much of my 20s. And even now, I think, yeah, I did meet the person I have ended up being quite happy with and married him when I was 30. But if I hadn't, I would have been doing something while I waited. I would have still been living my life and exploring, all the person I could have become on my own. I believe very strongly that there's not one right path, even though I think sometimes society and church tries to tell us that there is.
I think what you guys are describing is almost like the prosperity gospel. Like if you put in X, you're going to get Y. And like because we are pure, we're going to deserve this great crown of marriage and sex and
Mm-hmm.
whatever is going to come. Um, and it's very transactional and it puts
Mm-hmm.
us at a like position of deficit. Like because we don't have this, then we must not be doing enough of this. Um, and I think like being 20 and looking towards my future and what I want it to look like there is a man in there. And so I'm trying to figure out like what to do while I wait, but I don't want to be waiting for a man as well. Like I don't want to be, I don't want that to be the finish line. I want to be complete in myself as an individual. And I think it's really difficult to like value yourself as an individual in that space of waiting.
Hmm.
Yeah, and I think that the word waiting is really interesting to me because it signifies that you're waiting for something to happen, but
Hmm.
there's a lot
Right.
happening actively right now. And marriage is not an arrival, it's just the beginning of a new project. Um, a complex project, a project that will stunt you in some ways. It will. There are some
Mhm.
career paths, there are some opportunities. I grew up overseas. My dream was to go to the University of Istanbul and get my master's over there and live a life overseas. I didn't want to stay in the United States. I have never felt most at home here ever since I moved out when I was 12. And then I married a man who hadn't left the country since he emigrated here when he was 7. Mostly because he couldn't. He didn't have papers. But also he's a homebody. The happiest part of his day is walking in through our garage door and being home. That is his love. And I rage against walls, right? And so because of the person that I chose to marry, in many ways, my life is smaller
Mm.
than I thought it would be. And I don't think that I am more or less happy than I would have been if I hadn't gotten married. I am just different. And so
Mhm.
I think that it is really important to acknowledge that when you get married, your life will change in good ways and also in ways that you may not desire. And you
Mhm.
will just have to live with that decision, right? When you have kids, your life will narrow even more. I am
Mhm.
tethered to a baby because I have chosen to nurse him, right? So I can never go further than 4 hours away. I have like a radius because I have to be back to nurse his child. So what you're doing now isn't waiting. What you're doing now is living a version of your life that will completely shift when or if you get married, right? And there are some versions of the life that you're living now that you will miss even 10 years into marriage. You will still think about the person that you may have become if you hadn't gotten married. And that's just the reality of life. And I think that's why the idea of honoring the journey that you're on, honoring the journey for everything that it's bringing you in the moment that you're in. Because these years of being 20 and being untethered to anything, even more untethered than maybe Ezrica is because you're in college. And there's something about the possibility of college that is just, it feels limitless, right? And so that age of doing that it's gonna end, right? It's gonna end, and then you're gonna be in a different journey, in a continuation, but a different version of who you are, right? If Azrika were to meet the man that she is going to marry tomorrow and were to get married in 2 years, this version of Azrika will
It's
shift.
gone. It's
It's
gone forever.
gone. It's gone,
No.
right?
Okay, but that sounds really like door closing, which to me, I agree. Like every choice, every path you take,
Yeah, yeah.
you shut off certain other paths, and that's not just marriage, not marriage, or children, not children. That's career. That's where you live. Everything. If you're in one place, you literally can't be in another place. But I love that word pluripotent in your essay, Ezrika, because I think whether married or single, we all have so much potential, so
Mhm.
many possibilities. And I
Mhm.
hate the idea that choosing any one path in life locks you in, because I think if I've learned anything by living such an extremely long time so far, um, yeah, just that there are so many possibilities and you cannot predict the directions life is going to take. My best friend growing up, uh, who was this exact same age as me, and we've stayed close friends throughout our lives. She never married. So we're both 60 now. I'm 60 with grown kids. She's 60, never married, and with no kids. And I look at her life and my life, and then the lives of all my groups of friends, and think there are just so many different paths that you can take. And I think yeah, while you do have to recognize that, yeah, one choice does eliminate others, there are still so many other choices and so many other paths, whichever way you go.
Yeah, and
Anyway,
I
I
guess I
like that.
didn't want that to seem like defeatist. I just wanted
No,
it
I thought it was
to
beautiful.
Yeah.
I thought
acknowledge
it was
the
beautiful.
limitations that you're in. And to your point, Trudy, like you live 60 years, you live a million different lives, whether you get
Yeah,
married or not, you know?
yeah.
And but everything has a season and some things do end for a season.
And I think that one of the gifts of my specific journey what is that I've like sucked out as much as I can get from each versions of me. Um,
Mhm.
like I even found myself, I think Randy Roberts at church a couple weeks ago, he preached a sermon and it was talking about like how we're gonna all eventually meet death. And he shared a quote where it was someone that I think they dove into a river and it was shallow and so they end up becoming paralyzed. And the question of like, do you miss the days when you can walk? Something to that extent. But the person was like, yeah, but I'm not looking back to that old normal. I want like you don't because you can't go back. You can only create what the future looks like. And in the context of this, it was like heaven. There will be a place where there's like, a renewed perfect body. But in the context of this conversation, in the context of my life, I found myself literally praying last week, like I just want to enjoy today's normal
Mhm.
because there will be a day where maybe it's not even that I get married. Maybe it's that I become a New York Times bestselling author and I'm traveling anywhere and I miss the days that I woke up at 9 a.m. and did whatever I want. I don't wake up at 9. I wake up at 6. But like I could wake up at 9 and I could do whatever I wanted to do. And so I think what the message about marriage and relationship teaches us is to always pursue the next goal. It's to always look
Mhm.
forward. And I also want to be honest because I haven't spoken about this yet or like clearly articulated it. It's not an easy path. Just like Natalie was honest about the ways, marrying her husband stopped her from living as expansive as she imagined when she was younger. Being single in your 30s or even in your 20s or whatever, there is grief. Full disclosure, what day's today? Julie. I was crying on Saturday. And it was funny because I called my one of my best friend. I called my sister first and I was like, I'm so sad. Oh, I'm so sad about it. Hormones. Hormones. But then I still like I talked to my big sister because all of my family's also in Alabama and I'm in California. And then I called one of my best friends and we just commiserated. We were talking about how we're the two lepers at the pool of Bethesda. And like but I told her, I was like, hey, you there is still part of me that wrestles with the shame of like that
Mm.
this is my story. So it's not even that I always have it together. It was exacerbated, I think, by reading some of the comments on this. The comments didn't specifically get to me, but I'm like, man, this really is my life. This is my life where like people get to have very clear opinions about something that I didn't specifically choose, though it is something I cherish. And so it wasn't that it like their comments hurt my feelings because I think I don't know, people are entitled to their opinions, but it just re reminded me that this is the path that I walk. And so I cry. I cry about it. I spent Christmas literally by myself because I didn't get to be at home with my family this time because I was there for Thanksgiving. Then I went on a road trip. So I was stuck in California by myself in my room writing poetry. And I cried. And I cry and I cry. And I feel it and I let it pass through me and I experience it honestly. And I get sad and I lay in the bed for a day. Then I process it and I pray about it or I journal about it and I keep moving on. There's no version of life though where Ezrica won't cry.
Hmm.
There's just no iteration of this life I'm building where I will be devoid of grief. And so that's another, I think, point that's really important to me is Natalie, you've cried over your marriage, I'm sure. You've cried because of the pain of childbirth. You've cried Trudy Morgan, I said Morgan, Trudy, Trudy, similarly, like there's been sadness, I'm sure. And Ella, there's been
Absolutely.
sadness on yours. And we are all in different stages of life. Like, so I want people to know that getting married it doesn't solve anything. I love how you put it, Natalie. I really do. And lastly, I found myself thinking the other day, I was like, the day felt particularly heavy as I was just like processing stuff and maybe seeing other people's accomplishments on social media and reminding myself to honor my own journey. I found myself, I wrote it down, like I feel like I'm in a place of emotional hospice. When you're younger, you have so much hope for what will come. As I get older, I'm starting to say maybe it won't come. And that
Mm.
has to be okay because I do get to live a beautiful life as well. And so what I meant by emotional hospice was that like it's instead of like a constant pursuit. You know how like in hospice they switch from like trying to heal to like care. You're just going
Like
to live out the
inevitable,
rest of
yeah.
your days as best as possible. That's sort of the place I find myself in. And I think there is beauty to that, where again, I'm not
Yeah.
waiting and I'm not striving. Now the question is, well, like this is what it is. This is my today. What does it look like to have to hospice my life, to have the best care of what my life looks like today? And there's something that feels it's again, there's grief in that, but there's something that's also really powerful about that. So now I'm just giving myself permission to continue living abundantly. I violently reject this idea that if I never get married, I never get to have a good life. Um,
Yeah.
and then the last thing, because I've been yapping, but I imagine myself. There was one of the comments there were some comments that were fair, so I was like, "Oh, that's a good perspective." But one comment said, like, it's so interesting that Christianity puts so much emphasis on marriage when they worship a God who defied that culture. Like, and so
Hmm.
I imagine myself getting to heaven because there's this idea that as a woman, your worth is only in a man and like having children in finding a husband. In my mind's eye, imagine getting to heaven with a God that held the perspective that my worth was only based on my marriage. And he's like, hey, Ezrica, you lived to the best of your capability. You served, you were honest and all of those things, but you never got married. so your life was wasted. I would simply say is like, yeah, but neither did Jesus. And so I was just imagining what it would look like to be like, God can't possibly say that my life is without value if Jesus
Mm.
himself didn't get married. And so that was just a random thought experiment for myself to validate this idea that my life is not valuable because of who I say I do to. It's simply because of who I am and because of who God is as well. So those are like some of the other thoughts that, have been bouncing around my head.
I love your idea that like grief is constant and loneliness is not a symptom of like singleness. And I think it really is just our separation from Christ because like in the Bible, marriage is this connection between God and man. And I think we make it much more of a construct than it needs to be. So we're so unsatisfied with marriage on earth because we're not connected to God. We don't have that vine. And it's a lonely state to be human because we're not in heaven. Like that is what it is. But we can be fulfilled and we can process things through presence. Like you were saying, like I'm somebody who makes choices. I like planning. I have a Google Calendar with all my lunches every single week. And so
Wow.
being present is something I really struggle with and just like enjoying the process and where I'm at. Um, like I've known I've wanted to be a doctor my whole life and I'm constantly working towards this goal. And so marriage can seem like another one of these goals where I need to do this to make this happen. And it really is stagnant and it really leaves me in a place of loneliness where I feel like I'm not doing enough and I'm not making myself the fullest version that's able to be loved
Hmm.
instead of just like loving myself and letting myself be loved by Christ who's created me and who loves me and who is married to me in this like eternal sense.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I
And
think
also
go ahead.
girlfriends. Sorry,
Mhm.
Natalie.
No,
Sorry.
no, go for it.
Yeah, I want to write a book that's like to be titled To Be Loved by a Woman.
Mm,
Because I remember when I was younger, I remember years and years ago going through like an unrequited heartbreak, telling like one of my best friends, like, oh, I'm nobody's favorite person. Like, there's no one that I'm the center of their world, whatever that means. Now I'm like, ew, what was I on? But I realize, I realize that in many ways I thought like a man's love would heal parts of me outside of
right.
God because like God's love is constant, but we're also human beings and like we thrive in community. I thought that certain types of healing and awareness would come if I found a significant other. Boy, was I wrong. I've been loved so thoroughly, so beautifully by the women in my life that
Hmm.
they've and you know what? One of my best friend Hazel, the one I've mentioned like several best friends already, but she one time we were talking and she's like, yeah, but a friend's love in some ways is even more intentional than a marriage because like when you are in a relationship with a romantic partner, like and you have kids, like there's stake in the game.
There's obligation.
Yeah, yeah, but like a girl to like a best friend to best friend, she doesn't have to love me for no other reason. Like there's no other reason for her loving me than like just to be loved and to love her. We don't have kids together. If we break up, we can literally live our lives and never have to think about each other. So that's even a different form of love, not better, not worse, but a different aspect of love. And what I've learned is, yeah, love, being loved well if we decenter the concept of a man like being loved by a specific
Hmm.
man, being loved well adds greater it goes back to vocabulary. It gives you more vocabulary to understand yourself and to curate love in other forms. So when I get married, I understand bridesmaids more now, but when I get married, that man is marrying me and my five best friends, really because it's the way they've loved me that has shaped me into being someone that can hold that love if and when it comes, you know? So like that's another thing. I'm so for girl friendships. Like get you some girlfriends and do life. Like that's yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if you guys just saw Kylie walk into my room, but I live with my three best friends, and
Oh,
every single night,
amazing.
yeah, it's amazing. Every single night, we sit around the couch and we drink juice and we talk about our days. And we play Rosebud Thorn. And it's a game where you talk about the highs of your week, that's the rose, the thorn is the low, and then the bud is something you're looking forward to. And we'll do that every single day.
That's beautiful.
And on Valentine's Day, yeah, I was crying, but I also went to three Galentines and I had a photo shoot. And I have so much love that I think is really, really rare and like such a blessing to be in this space of community, like that I get to live with such amazing women and just have space to like feel big feelings all the time and be held in that is really special.
Hmm. It is.
There's
Hold on
nothing
to
like the
that.
women in our lives. They really shape us in ways that are maybe so much deeper than any other relationship that we have. When I was in college, I met my husband my junior year. So for 2 years, I was single. And I intentionally chose to invest in my girlfriends. I didn't want to be,
Mhm.
there was a lot of like these like mixed gender groups of friends, and it was very flirtatious and very like, like they're, the vibe. We've been in college. Like
Yeah.
we all know the vibe. I wasn't
Incestuous,
interested in that.
really.
I was like, these guys, they're just like kind of feeding their ego off of my attention. Like I'm not interested in them. These are small men that I'm not going to be friends with after school. Who I am going to retain are my girlfriends. And
Mm.
that's why, I had people in college that when I started dating Doug, they came up to me and they were like, this is just bizarre because you were the most single person on campus and now you're like married because we went, it was kind of a fast relationship, but I invested in those girlfriends, and every single one of the girlfriends that I really invested in, that I poured into, that I scheduled date nights with when our schedules were just too like apart and we weren't seeing each other enough. One of my friends and I scheduled a weekly date night to make sure that we would connect even when we weren't seeing each other during the week. And all of those women continue to be central to my existence. They
Oh,
continue to
that's so
be,
inspiring.
yes, they're there, and all of them now I think are married. We all got married at different times. Like it's not like we all got married in college, right? We all got married in different times. We all, we're living literally across the world. Like I have friends that are living out of the country and we're still so connected. And those relationships, I think, gosh, I mean, just speaking to whoever might be listening that's in college, those are the relationships that are
Hmm.
really going to surpass all the things, you know.
Hmm.
So I really hope that you would pour into those. I'm really interested to hear from you guys. How can the church do better at empowering and acknowledging the power that single people in the community have?
Mm.
I think we ignore that. Like we talk a lot about the marriage and the Bible and all of that, but there is a passage. I mean, first of all, there's Jesus, right? As Ezrica so aptly pointed out, not married. And then there's also a passage in the Bible where the Apostle Paul says, if you have to get married, but really it's better for ministry if you don't, right? That's essentially the thesis of his verses. And so he's acknowledging there that there's a freedom and a power that there is in singleness that you lose, that you acquiesce when you get married. You give up, And so we don't acknowledge those verses, I feel like, in church. And I'm really interested to hear. I've had someone ask me specifically to talk about this.
Hmm.
How do we make room, and not just room that says you're waiting for something, but
Hmm.
room
Mm.
that acknowledges the independent, like, power of singleness in the church community?
Hmm.
And I don't know the answer to that, so I wanted to bring it to you guys.
Hmm.
I mean, I
Yeah,
think the
that's a
church
good
needs to,
question.
first of all, stop treating singleness as the second best and
Hmm.
stop
Hmm.
talking to people and assuming in such a way that if you are not married, that must be the next thing and you must be waiting for that to come along. Stop structuring things in the church so much around couples and families. I mean, that's great for those of us who are in couples and who have families, but yeah, quite often and I don't mean just the church in the big capital C church, but in local congregations, there's not a good place for single people and for acknowledging their not only their gifts but their full membership and participation. And I agree, I don't know all the answers either, but it's something that definitely needs to change.
Yeah. Yeah, I do. It's funny because I don't know why I feel like all warm and fuzzy inside. I feel a little bit motivated because I think that a large part of changing the narrative is having people that challenge the narrative.
Mm,
And as I mentioned, like I've left a church community because I'm like, I really hate this talk. Like I hate how relationship, how frequently and how that like, just makes my skin crawl thinking about it. But I also realize that sometimes I don't want to go to church because it's really lonely. Like because church is very, it's catered to, unless you're in a college campus where like
mhm,
but like churches cater to like moms and their kiddos or husbands and wives or people that are dating and then there's little old me. But I feel like a large part of changing the narrative is having people that does the work for themselves so they can live in a way that's just challenging. Like if I embody joy and contentment where I am, like if I'm unpunishable in a sense, right? Like it people now have to reckon with the reality that you can live abundantly this way. Because the narrative is that you don't, that like Trudy said, like that like singleness is the second best life. It's the oh well it didn't work out the first way. Now just live in
Try and
obscurity
make the
in this
best of
way.
it. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that that's one way is to have the people who are navigating singleness find courage to do it well. Um, and I think that, that depends a lot on the internal work. But I also think that, as Trudy said, there just definitely has to be a broadening of perspective in general. And I don't know. I thought I was gonna have a clearer answer, but as I'm talking, I'm like, I actually don't know. I don't know because, like, again, so much of the church is built on relationships. And as someone outside of it, I can tell you that the church is not for me in many
mm.
regards. There aren't programs around being a single person that's not like, let's do a speed dating. You know? There, like there's the liminal space of not it's treated as a liminal space again like you're in between things. No, I'm not. No, I'm not. I'm fully arrived. I'm here today and this is me. And I don't think there's programming and sermons that do that. Um Actually, another thought. Wow, guys, this is really how I write. You see how like I'm very random, like things are popping up as I'm speaking. That's what's happening when I'm writing things. I do think that's something I feel really connected to. There was a magazine. It was like it's a Christian-based magazine, and on it they had like a bookmark that had questions in it. And one of the questions were like, "Do you think men and women should have different rites of passage?" Right? It's like, whoa, that's a really good question. Because I'm like, what was my rites of passage into womanhood? And I realized that for a woman, your rites of passage is marriage and children. For a man, it's sex and marriage. And I'm like, there has to be another way to define your womanhood that's outside of relationship. So maybe that's something I think I would love to start is like to curate events that women get to define their identity independent of relationship status. Um and yeah, because I'm a full woman, I am a woman. Even if I never get married. So that's something that I think could really be meaningful is to curate language around self-identity that doesn't have to do with marriage or children.
Mm. I love, Ezrica, when you're talking about problems, you're starting with yourself and like how you can bring to the table. My mom
Mm,
was always saying that community starts with me. So if I'm seeing these deficits in the church, like what can I bring to fill the space?
yeah.
But I don't know. I don't know. I am a single person in the church. I have been set up with a lot of people in the church because everybody's like, "Oh, Ella's single. This is great." And I think that maybe isn't the best place to start. Um, like that doesn't make me feel good about sitting by myself, which is something
Mm,
that I want to do sometimes.
mm,
Um, so I think just creating spaces in the church where you can be present and that where you're at, and like you were saying, not in this liminal space, but in this journey of arriving
mm,
in
yeah.
selfhood.
Yeah.
Mm. There is beauty to the community of women. When I was in, when I lived in South Korea, I got my period for the first time. And there was a small group of, excuse me, there was a small group of missionaries there. And one of the women, she was like, we need to celebrate this. this is a big this is a
Oh.
big deal for you. She was a single woman as well. She was like in her 40s, single. To my knowledge, she never got married. She was one of the most important role models in my life in my early teens.
Mm.
She had the time to pour into me that other women didn't have. And she used that time. She poured into me. She invited me over for sleepovers. She got me a cake when I got my period. She bought me books that she knew that I would be interested in because I was always an avid reader. And she just really helped me form an ideology on the power of female community. And I've always thought of her and I've always looked back to her. She was also Canadian. And I've always looked back to her as someone that had the time. And now that I'm older, I can see this. She had the time that other people didn't have to
Mm.
really help a young girl start forming a sense of self. A young girl on the brink of that, right? Really start forming a sense of self that had nothing to do with marriage and relationships because she wasn't married. She wasn't in a relationship. She was just this amazing woman, taking life by the horns. And so I think that having more spaces like that in church, so many of our women's ministries events are like, Mother's Day stuff and stuff that is really formulated around the woman who is in a relationship. And I think that it's because in Western culture, we've really like shifted to this like nucleus family. And so
Yeah.
who are you if you're not a part of a nucleus family, right? What is your place in society if you don't have a husband and kids to really like sandwich you in? But community is functions better when it's broader than that, right? In Hispanic culture, we have las tías, right? Las tías y los tíos, and they're not necessarily they're independent of marriage. They're it's like this community of women that just exist in your social sphere, and that doesn't exist so much in our churches. And so maybe if we really acknowledged, the power of, first of all, extended community that fits people in all sorts of journeys, and then
Hmm.
also had events that acknowledge the power of womanhood that isn't tied to husbands and children and all these things, then there would be space for women that aren't married,
Mm.
or that aren't mothers and that aren't in relationships and that are still really, really important to the community because her name was Karen. Karen was one of the most important women in my life.
Mm.
And she could do that because, not despite, but because she
Mm.
was single.
Hmm.
Mhm.
This reminds me of one of the comments. I don't have Facebook, so my big sister, I was like, "Sister, what are they saying?" Which I never do, but we had like a little bit of a heads up. But under there was a comment that was basically like, "Oh, wait till they turn 40 and they can't have
Oh yeah,
kids."
yeah. That's the one. That's the one I couldn't stop help but respond
Yeah.
to. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And I was just like, joke's on you, sir. But underneath that, one of the comments is like, there are many, I think it was a woman that was in her 40s that's like, I'm similar to the author and I have no regrets. Then there's a statement that I will live inside of me and it will grow gardens in my soul because the commenter said there are many ways to quote in quotation have kids. Like
Mm.
you can volunteer for Pathfinders, you can work for the hospital, you can have like nieces and nephews. And when my sister was reading that, I was like, wait, sister, pause. That's the single most beautiful thing. Like to the point that I had my sister message her for me to thank her for that perspective because I'd already known, like, bearing children is not something I specifically want to do. And who knows, even if I get married, but I do have kids because I'm a children's author. My niece and we just finished writing our first children's book together because I don't get to see her often, and we just meet over Canva and write little stories. I have children that they didn't come from the my physical womb, but maybe my spiritual womb.
Mm.
And this also applies to people who did get married and found out they were infertile, which is another journey. And so that changed the language I have about like marriage and childbearing. And Natalie, as you're mentioning, like that woman impacted you in a way that was so meaningful that you get to impact us because she changed your worldview that you get to bring to Spectrum and you get to bring to the world. And yeah, I think that's just really beautiful. So for someone that's listening that may not know if they want to have kids or may not want to get married, or you are married and you can't have kids, there are many ways to quote unquote have kids. It may not be like through natural birth or birth, but you can care for someone in a way that like you literally give them life. And this just I don't know. I suspect we're probably winding down soon, but I think this is my takeaway is that as a woman, we really have our path has been predefined from before we were born. And this also we didn't touch on this at all, but the culture of marriage veers into the beauty culture. The
Mm.
ways from before I knew who Ezrica was, I knew I needed to be skinny. I knew I needed to be beautiful. The ways that I took this part of the article out because it started to get muddy, but the way that culture, society props up our young bodies because that's like attractive to men, and then we can have children, and then discards our married body or our bodies that bear children, that we're just disposable. Like we're treated as a means to an end.
Mm.
And I think that, yeah. I'm a living, I think, witness that you can live beautifully and courageously and honestly and curiously. You can experience grief and joy, that your story doesn't end because your marriage didn't begin or marriage didn't begin. I think that for me, this article was just meant to show anyone else that as difficult as it may be, when your life doesn't fit the story that's been told to us, you still get permission to rewrite that narrative or to write the narrative in a way that has a beautiful ending or that it's beautiful. And I think that's I think why this article had to be published is because I need people to know like you get to have a good life too, even if that life doesn't look like what we were always told it should. Um, and yeah, I feel potent. I feel powerful, more powerful than I ever have, and I also feel pluripotent, more undifferentiated, more un like my story is still being written, and I cherish
Mm.
that with my entire soul. Yep. I don't know if
Wonderful.
anyone else has a takeaway. No, no,
That sounds
no.
like a great closing line.
I was
That
gonna say,
was
I feel like we need to
beautiful.
end there. That was
Yeah, yeah,
beautiful.
that was perfect.